Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful and so spooky neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're joining us here on Halloween week, our spooky middle grade celebration. Tonight, our celebration continues with Lorien Lawrence. She is a member of the Spooky Middle Grade Authors, and she is here to celebrate her new middle grade novel, The Stitchers. Before we invite Lorien in to celebrate The Stitchers, I want to invite you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Parents Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll down to live events because I want you to know all about our brand new, totally interactive, totally virtual educational magic show. The magic between us is respect and kindness. I am loving performing this show. I just received an email from Mr. Cadillo down in Colegio Puertorriqueño de Niños en Guaynabo, Puerto Rico. A huge thank you to Jedley for your amazing show. The magic between us is respect and kindness. My fourth graders were able to review and practice acts of respect and kindness during your amazing magic show, and furthermore, to make connections with our school's core value to practice empathy. Thank you so much, Mr. Cadillo. I had a great time. Your girls were amazing. I would love to say the same thing about the kids in your community. Now, I know you are probably not the principal of your kids' school. You're the home teacher of your kids at the moment. You may not be the in-school teacher, but now more than ever, you are collaborating with your kids' school. And I would love for you to introduce my show to your kids' teacher, to your kids' principal, and hopefully they're going to be excited about the magic between us is respect and kindness, and invite me to come out and perform for your kids. And we'll give you a link and you can see the show too. Learn more about the show and see the reviews for this totally interactive, totally virtual show at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Joining us right now from the Nutmeg State of Connecticut. She is part of the Spooky Middle Grade Authors. Such a great group of authors. She's here to celebrate her spooky middle grade book, The Stitchers. Please welcome to the show, Lorien Lawrence. Lorien, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
I am really excited. We always have a great time with the spooky authors. Spooky stories seem to be that genre that kids love, and if a kid loves it in the middle grade ages, they love it forever.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I heard my first spooky story when I was in kindergarten. My librarian read us, probably a little bit inappropriate, but read us scary stories to tell in the dark, and sat us all in a circle and kind of told us the folk tales. And I'm still obsessed with, folklore and spooky things as an adult. And I see it definitely with my students, my 7th grade students. They're really into the genre.
Now, I think growing up, I had this idea that spooky stories was a guy thing. Probably because I was a dopey guy. It was almost 100 years ago, and I thought everything cool was a guy thing. But I'm finding, I don't know the exact ratio, but there's a huge percentage of the spooky middle grade authors are women. Mm-hmm. And I know here in my family, the person who is most into spooky stories is my 24-year-old daughter. And so I don't know. Is it a guy thing? Is it more of a girl thing? Or is it just a kind of human spooky thing?
I think it's just a human spooky thing. I think what might have given you that impression is that books used to be marketed forever until pretty recently. They would be marketed as like a girl book or a boy book. And girl books always had pink and purple and happy, pastel-y kind of colors. And scary books never had those colors and weren't marketed towards girls. And then the boys would get the books with colors like the Stitchers. And that's actually a conversation I had with my team at Abrams Books when we were talking about cover ideas. I said I didn't want it to be labeled or marketed in any kind of like gender specific way. I just want, like, kids don't care. They just want to read a good story. And the girls that I teach, they don't pay any attention to the colors on the book, and neither do the boys. So we actually had like a conversation about that, which is how I ended up with like the reds and the blues and the oranges that are on the Stitchers cover.
Is that a good sign that we're evolving as a society, maybe?
Oh, I hope so. I mean, we need to, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many, when you tell kids, like a group of kids, you can only read a certain type of books because those are boy books. Mm-hmm. And you can only read a certain type of books because those are girl books. I feel like that's really damaging, and it narrows the scope. Like, as an English teacher, I just want my kids to read. Mm-hmm. I don't care really what they're reading. The skills that I want them to be practicing as they're reading, they can accomplish with pretty much any book as long as it's on grade level. But if you tell, a group of girls, well, that's not really for you, it's going to give them a bad relationship with books and reading in general. And I think we did that, not we as in you and me, but I think as society, mm-hmm. we did that for a long time. And we're starting to kind of crawl our way out of it, which I think is a good thing.
As you were speaking, I had this flashback, which happens on the show all the time. Somebody says something, it makes me remember something. And I remember reading Little Women in secret.
In secret.
In secret. Yeah. It was in the house.
Because it made you feel ashamed, which is so silly, because it's just a good book, not a good girl book, but just a good book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I've said it. I come out in public. I read Little Women as a kid, and I loved it. So
Did you see the movie, the recent?
I didn't. I fall asleep at the movies, so I decided that doesn't make sense to me to invest that money, especially now it's so expensive. Yeah. But tell me, what is the Stitchers all about? How are we going to be spooked by the Stitchers?
The Stitchers is actually the first in a series. The series is called Fright Watch, so the second one comes out next year. And it follows these two kids. The main character's name is Quinn. She's a 13-year-old runner. Like, she's on the track team. She's really good. And she starts to notice that something really weird is up with her neighbors. They don't seem to age. They're not, like, getting any younger, but they're not getting any older. And they're able to do things that people of their age just don't seem like they'd be able to do. And they're always in bandages, and then the next day they're out of the bandages. It's just really suspicious. And so she kind of recruits her friend Mike, who's also on the track team, who's also a runner, to like go on these early morning runs and spy on them. And so as they start to spy, they uncover what the oldies, as they call them, are hiding, and it's actually way darker and scarier than they thought. And it kind of, they realize that Quinn is actually in danger from these people, and that they have kind of a ticking clock until they can figure out how to stop them. Awesome.
Where did the inspiration for the story come from? Neighbors with bandages, and then they're better the next day, and they're not aging.
A couple things. One, I grew up in a town in Connecticut called Stratford, and it is known for having a bunch of folklore. And as I said, like in kindergarten, I grew up like liking folklore really young. And so there's like a town witch that allegedly haunts the library, and a graveyard by the library. And there's a pond that I used to live by that is quite creepy. And I've always kind of been interested in like the fountain of youth and people's obsession with age. I teach 7th graders, and they are just obsessed with getting older. They just want to be older and want to grow up so fast. And then on the other hand, I have my grandmother, who I actually don't even know how old she is for real, because she's been lying about her age since I was like 2. So I really have no idea how old she is, because it changes every minute. And because she wants to be younger and is obsessed with looking beautiful and being young, and never wanted to grow old. And so one of the main villains, I guess you can say. One of the oldies I actually based off of my grandma, which sounds really strange, but someone who has like this obsession with vanity and with youth. So she looks like my grandma. She's got a big black beehive and very glamorous. My grandmother is always like in dresses and full makeup, and so I guess like a combination of that, like supernatural folklore, and from what I was seeing from my grandma, I kind of merged the two together.
I want to ask you about folklore and how it oftentimes gets connected with the town. But before I do that, is your grandmother aware that she was the inspiration for one of the villains in your book?
She loves it. Loves it. She just wanted to make sure that she looked beautiful. So, and she did. I made her very glamorous.
That's awesome. You were mentioning that Stratford, Connecticut, and I'm very familiar with Stratford, is one of these places that, there's a lot of kind of creepy stories connected with it here. In Massachusetts, of course, we have Salem. And as I travel all around, I hear about this place or that place being haunted, and there's all this weird stuff going on. What is it? Why do you think certain towns, certain areas get that kind of creepy label?
I think when when something bad happens, like in Salem, obviously we had the Salem witch trials, and in Stratford, we actually had a witch trial before Salem.
Oh, wow.
Like significantly before. Her name was Goody Bassett. I think her name was actually Sarah Bassett, and they called her Goody Bassett. And she was executed for witchcraft. And she was actually one of the first women who confessed, I'm putting in air quotes, to being a witch. And so I think when your town starts out being a new town, like in this, the Puritan times, and then it starts in that kind of tragedy with literally a witch hunt, I just feel like it's like natural for ghost stories to kind of come out with that. My husband's from England, and so he doesn't think anything in America is old. But for us as Americans, Boston and Massachusetts and Connecticut, like we're older states. And so, it may not be like a history like England, but we have our history. It feels like this is the old stuff, right? And so we have a lot of stories that come out of that, and New England is just so full of it, and I think that's why we do Halloween so well over here.
Yeah, you're right. We host international kids here in our home, and I remember one of our Chinese students, I was taking her through Boston, and I think we came to Paul Revere's house or one of the churches, and I said, that building is almost 300 years old. And I was really surprised that she wasn't impressed at all until we went home and Googled her city in China and found out that in Zhejiang, China, there's a bridge that's 1,200 years old.
Yep.
And I said...
A bridge, yeah.
A bridge. I said, okay, all right, you got me beat. There's kind of a almost... an empowering thing that happens when kids are reading spooky books. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but it seems to be a way that kids can kind of wrestle with some of the demons that haunt them in their lives.
I think that's like a really amazing way to put it, and I haven't heard anybody put it that way, so thank you for that, because I think that does sum up like the spooky genre really well. Like a lot of people will say like, will look me up and down and be like, you write horror or you read horror or you like that kind of stuff. And let me preface by saying I'm a big chicken, and I like spooky, and I like things that are scary but within reason. And I am prone towards the supernatural, I guess, because I don't 100% believe in it. Like I've never seen a ghost. I've never encountered anything supernatural. So it feels like a safe scare. And in middle grade spooky books or middle grade horror, the kids usually win, right? The kids are usually, as authors, we're giving the reader hope at the end. So it is really empowering. I agree with you that like when a kid reads about another kid their age or maybe a little bit older or a little bit younger who is able to defeat something so horrible and scary, it can give them a little hope that like, wow, if they just defeated that monster, like what can I do? And I do think that is something like quite special about this genre that is specific to this genre.
And you mentioning 7th graders, middle school, that's a really difficult time in a kid's life, because I think a lot of kids, I think one of the reasons you were mentioning earlier that your kids are so anxious to grow up, I think one of the reasons is that and I think most of the pressure is they put on themselves. They put on themselves this pressure to know everything because they think all of their peers know everything.
Yes.
And one of the things that I told my son one night when him and his buddies were around kind of trying to fool each other to let each other know they were the ones who had all the information, I just sat down with them all and go, dudes, none of you know anything at all, so why don't you just chill out?
It's so true. I feel like I have those conversations all the time with my students. But they're like, at this age, they're like literally crawling out of their skin. Mm-hmm. Like the boys in my classes wear shorts all year round, no matter what the temperature is, because they're growing so much. And I've literally had parents say, no, I'm done buying pants because they're just outgrowing them every other week. So I'm not spending all of that money. And they're just like up and down and all over the place. And it is a really tough age. But the thing I like about that age group to teach and to write for and to read books about is that it's also quite a hopeful age. Yes, they think they know everything, but they're also open, mm-hmm. at least in my experience. They seem more open than high schoolers to feedback. Mm-hmm. And like, they're still kind of malleable in that way. Whereas I feel like whenever I'm having interactions with high schoolers, they're a little more jaded. And I prefer like the hopeful kind of wide-eyed version of students and readers.
Yeah. Tell me, as a teacher of middle school kids, how do you, I'm imagining, there are some 7th graders who come to you that have been disillusioned. They were reluctant readers and it was a challenge for them. And by the time 7th grade runs around, they're like, I'm tapping out. I might read something if it's the only way that I'm going to pass Miss Lawrence's class, but otherwise, read for fun, ain't going to do that. How do we get those kids back?
I experience that constantly, and it's a little bit heartbreaking because I think some of it has to do with it's not thought of as being something that's very cool, mm-hmm. To do. I think there are certain authors who've like completely broken through the gender barriers, this is what boys should read, this is what girls should read, and have just been something that's been, my students have seen as being really cool to read, and that's been Rick Riordan and the Lightning Thief series and all of those. I feel like that series is pretty groundbreaking in that it kind of smashed those. Like it has really strong girl characters, really strong boy characters, like a diverse cast. And it gets away from those covers that my students won't read anything, even if it's for their age level, if they think the cover looks babyish. So I think our covers are getting better as like a publishing industry, which is good to see. But they also, I think education is changing. So right now in 7th grade, our curriculum is 99% choice-based. Not the curriculum itself, but what they read. If right now we're doing an author study unit, they have to read 2 to 3 novels by the same author, but they get to choose the author. So that is kind of a way in. You still have those kids who are a bit resistant and who are like, well, I don't like any author. Mm-hmm. And that's when you have to be, I honestly think like the best teachers are ones who read a lot. Not to pat myself on the back, but I read a lot of middle grade because I want to be able to like hold up a book and say, oh my gosh, I just finished this last night. I couldn't put it down. This is what it's about. And when you sound excited and you actually know what you're talking about, they get excited. And then they start to line up for that book. Mm-hmm. If you're the type of teacher who just never updates the classroom library, you have the same books sitting in the back collecting dust, and they're the only books that you've read because we're all burnt out. We all are running out of time. I get it. But then the kids aren't going to ever be enthusiastic about reading. So like more money should be spent on classroom libraries in terms of school budgets. And right now it's really not, which I think needs to change.
Boy, man, you talk about something near and dear to my heart. The library when I was in middle school, and the librarian at my elementary school was a K through 8 school. She kept me in that school, and it was a public school, and legally they couldn't have thrown me out of the school, but they would have if there was any other way. But Mrs. Drew saved me because, they got to the point, they kind of understood me, and the teacher said, okay, this is the work that you have to do in this class. If you finish it in 5 minutes and you do it right, you can go to the library where you can create and you can write and you can make videos and tapes and all that other kind of stuff. And I would do the work, I would get it right, and then I would race down to the library and spend hours and hours. And that was such a special time for me, but it breaks my heart as I go around to different schools, and it always seems to be in the places where a library is needed most, the urban schools, where they don't have any school library.
Yep. I work now in Westport, which we have a good income. We have a good school library. I worked in New Haven before this, and there was like a long period. We had a library, but we didn't have a librarian. So it was just shut for like half a year. And then there was like no real system for kids to go down and just browse and just look at a cover of a book and say, oh, that actually, and have somebody there who's like, oh, I think you'd really love this one. Kids, especially this crucial age, because this really, the middle school years, I think, is when they start to make these choices of I'm going to be a reader or I'm not. And to make them readers, we have to be constantly engaging with them about books. So even if they don't want to tell their friends that they were up till 10 o'clock reading, this book last night, it matters that they're doing it. And yeah, I don't know how many of them are.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been asking all the spooky middle grade authors is, do you have an especially fun or creepy Halloween memory, or memory of something that happened around Halloween?
I wish I did. I wish I had a ghost story. I've been on so many ghost hunts. Like, I'm waiting for a ghost to come and find me. They're ignoring me, and I feel very left out. I do love Halloween with like every fiber of my being, and I'm sad my kids can't go trick-or-treating this year, but it is what it is. I do remember moving to England when I got out of college, and I think it's a bigger deal now, but then I moved to a city called Bristol, and I got all dressed up. I bought like so much candy. I decorated like the front of our apartment and like sat down outside with my buckets, and every family walked right by me. And I finally was like, "What? I have candy. Come see me." And this woman just looked at me and gave me the most like, I don't know, intense look and was like, "You look too eager," and like kept walking by me. And I was like, oh, and I asked my now husband later, like, what I was doing wrong. And he's like, it's just not a thing here. And that was like probably my saddest Halloween memory. My brother-in-law lives in London, and he told me that it's like a big deal now, that it's kind of caught up, which makes me happy to maybe go back and kind of see what such an old and spooky country does for Halloween. But yeah, that's not a spooky memory, but it was my sad Halloween memory.
I'm going to share this with you. I don't know where it falls. I don't know if I don't think it's a ghost story, but my grandmother, who was my best buddy growing up, especially through middle school, she passed away when my son was 6 months old. She never had a chance to meet my daughter, who came a couple years later. But there was my grandmother's personality was so big that, everybody talks about her. So she had heard these stories, and of course there's pictures of my grandmother. And before my son was born, my grandmother sat down with me and she said, "Now what are you going to call your baby?" And I said, "Well, if it's a boy, we're going to call him Christopher. If it's a girl, we're going to call her Alejandra." And my grandma would sit there going, what? And I said, "Alejandra." And she, I'm going to call it Sally. I'm like, fine. Well, my son was born. It was Christopher. She could pronounce Christopher. But anyways, years later, when my daughter was 2 or 3, she had never heard that story. She was too young. But when she was 2 or 3 years old, maybe 4, she had all her dolls lined up. She organized all her dolls. And I went into the room with my wife and we said, who's this doll? And she said, well, that's Sally. I said, okay. And what about this doll? That's Sally. That's Sally. That's Sally.
No
That's
way.
Sally. Yeah. My wife and I just kind of, we're going to creep out of here.
Did you ask her if, like, the presence of somebody came
No.
Or were you just like, no, I don't want to know.
I don't want to know. I don't know. It was like, if my grandmother is talking to her, that's really cool because she never hurt me. She's not going to hurt my kid.
Yeah. Well, that's quite sweet.
Yeah. So I know everybody's going to want to know where they can find out more about the Stitchers and also find out more about Lorien Lawrence. Where can they go online?
My website is up to date with my book, where you can get signed copies, my events and interviews and things. So that's LorienLawrence.com.
Awesome. And I love that you sounded surprised that your website was up to date.
Because it's recent. It's a recent development that it is up to date, and I'm trying to make sure that I keep doing that.
Well, my amazing daughter, Alejandra, who my grandmother wanted to call Sally, has updated the readingwithyourkids.com website, and it's awesome. So after you finish visiting LorienLawrence.com, make sure you check out readingwithyourkids.com. We've had a great time talking about the Stitchers, talking about spooky stories, talking about how we can motivate our middle school kids to read with our guest, Lorien Lawrence. Lorien, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Josh Roberts. He is also a member of the Spooky Middle Grade Authors. He is here to tell us about the Witches of Willow Cove. He is also going to be telling us what it is like to grow up in an old Victorian funeral home. An operating Victorian funeral home. What it's like growing up in a funeral home. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book, and it is absolutely free. No need to pay anybody to facilitate your appearance on the show. It is absolutely free. And it's fun. And it's easy. All you need to do is you go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. There is a spot up on top of the page that says authors. Click here. Click there. Scroll down to where it says be a guest. Be a guest. And you'll find out all about it. It's really, really simple. That's readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Lorien Lawrence. Please be sure to check out the Stitchers. Also want to thank my amazing team, starting with my daughter, Alejandra Doherty, my producer, Fatima Khan, my author ambassador, Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for checking out The Magic Between Us is Respect and Kindness and telling your principal and your teachers all about it. But most of all, of course, thank you so much for making the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.